So, welcome and thank you for joining us again for another in our series of webinars. As usual, we take a great deal of pleasure in engaging with folks of Washington State, and we hope that information shared would benefit you in your daily engagement as well as serve as a resource for ongoing engagement with the people you serve. So today, and I want to remind you that the session will be recorded. So please note that. So today's subject matter is from barriers to breakthroughs, fostering change, optimism, and motivation in recovery-oriented care. So this training is really about how we as providers can spark and sustain hope and motivation across different areas of clients' lives. So we want to look certainly at the different service entities and modalities across FCS. We talk about housing, employment, and recovery in general. So we're really looking at a cross section of how we can really foster motivation, optimism to really engender change to ensure that we are able to move from barriers to breakthrough. So it's really about how do we change, how do we promote, how do we really empower folks to make that shift in paradigm that really facilitates change talk and change behavior to really move them towards their recovery goals. So welcome again, and today's webinar is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Health Care Authority. And as usual, this is an interactive webinar, and we encourage you to ask questions and participate through the session. The information, the slides, and the video will be shared with you at a later date. We'll talk some more about that. Just for housekeeping, just be reminded that this is in webinar style, and we ask that you engage via the chat. You'll have the option as well to go to the chat and save the entire chat by going to the three dots, use that drop down, and then you can certainly save the entire chat. We strive to make things as accessible as possible, so if there's any questions or concerns, just let us know about accessibility. A note about artificial intelligence. Please note that the use of any automated note-taking bots or similar tools during any Washington State webinar or so forth requires prior approval, and I think Emily alluded to that, and that's important. Just to remind folks that I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Emily Bands, who will be providing technical assistance and support. So just a reminder about artificial intelligence is important. Materials and recording, please note that materials and recordings will no longer be emailed to participants, but the materials will be uploaded to the chat during today's session, and the facilitators will upload a PowerPoint, as well as the recording of today's session will be available on FCS channel, Foundational Community Support. So look out for that, and that's where most of the information certainly will be shared. So our learning objective for today, the hope that you get these as takeaways, is really to have a good understanding and be able to describe motivation and optimism across housing, employment, and recovery contexts. So really looking at how motivation and optimism really presents across those contexts, as well as applying motivational interview and recovery-oriented practices to promote change in those diverse service settings. So we're really looking at how we can use MI and recovery-oriented practices to inspire and promote change. And we want to really have a good understanding of practical strategies to strengthen hope and resilience for clients facing mental health conditions, employment, substance use challenges as well. So once again, most of our discourse today is going to really be focused across different settings and really honing in on motivational opportunities and strategies and techniques, and really working towards fostering and promoting hope and resilience for folks to really engage in change behavior to materialize those recovery goals that they may have. So that's our learning objectives for today. So let's start out. What is motivation? What does motivation mean to you? Just in a few words, tell me what is your understanding of motivation and what it looks like for you, what it feels like, what drives motivation both for you and the people that you serve. Love that. Moving forward. Yes, it's really about moving in a direction, an intrinsic self-drive towards a goal. And Jeffrey coined that very well. He says for a number of our participants, it's just about survival, right? It's about continuing existence. It's about striving for continued sustained existence. Something that causes you to move or change, self-direction, motivation. So most of you are really hitting the target there. Motivation is really that all-encompassing element. Um, it is really the reason or desire for acting or behaving in a particular way, right? It serves as a force to really initiate and guide behavior towards a goal. So it is those elements, that fervor, those intrinsic and extrinsic concepts that really help us focus on a goal and move in that direction of that goal purposefully and intentionally. Put simply, it's the reason for acting or behaving in a particular way. So we'll look really at not only how we manifest that those characteristics and those efforts and those particular traits, but what it looks like in different setting and what inspires it, what gets it moving and sustains it over time. So let's take a gander at what are some of the concepts and theories that really speaks to motivation, and there's a number of them. So the theories of motivation, first of all, let's make it very clear. There's no single theory or no single concept of how motivation or how it explains all aspects of human motivation. But there are some theories that really give some explanation and a basis for the development of approaches or techniques that will help us really inspire and prompt motivation. And those theories are divided into two columns or to two contexts. There's the content theory. When we speak to that, we speak to what motivates people. What are the things that motivate people? What are the inspirations? What are those concrete elements that drives motivation? So for most of us, I'm sure you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I think someone spoke to that concept of what is it takes to have those basic elements for our survival, right? How do we fulfill progressive needs? How do we meet our basic needs? We start with those basic physiological and then safety needs and progress to social belonging, and we really aspire to some level of self-actualization. And that drives our motivation daily, momentary, and continuously. So we also look at self-determination theory, which is this kind of optimal motivation that comes from fulfilling those basic psychological needs. So we look at both our physiological need and our psychological need that really drives our efforts, our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions towards actually maintaining some level of sustainability and survival. And then we have McLennan's theory of needs, which identifies three needs that drive behavior: the need for achievement, the need for power, and the need for affiliation. So when we speak to that, we speak about the human desire to have some level of autonomy and control and power, and a need for connecting with others, and a need for achievement as we strive in our efforts every day. So that's truly the context concept of the theory. And then there's the process. So we look at what is it we think, what are those elements, and then we look at what we do, how motivation occurs, what are the actions that reflects motivation. So we look at goal setting theory. It suggests that specific challenges or goals along with appropriate feedback lead to a higher level of performance. So once we set the goals and we have those elements where we get some feedback as to how we're progressing that keeps us inspired and moving in directionally towards those goals. Then there's certainly conditioning and reinforcement. And that's an important element of it. It's very common across our service entity. It is common across just human behavior altogether. When we speak of how past actions influence future behavior, primarily through some level of reinforcement or rewards, or failures or punishment. So if we keep doing, if we act in a way and it's rewarded with tangible things, then we tend to repeat those actions continuously to achieve those predictable rewards. So there's a number of theories of motivation, but these are some of the most common ones, and as well as how they are divided in those two elements in terms of what motivates people and how people act towards motivation. And that's an important framework to have in the first place. So once we understand where motivation comes from, how it's conceptualized, we want to have a sense as to what types of motivations they are. So as we may know, they are certainly extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, right? I think someone spoke to that earlier in their comment, in that they are external elements that drive motivation. Things outside of ourselves that often involves external rewards such as trophy, rewards, money, social recognition, or praise tend to drive motivation, as well as those internal elements that comes from deep within ourselves. And it oftentimes have those gratifications or rewards for doing something that is really germane to us, right? The individual. So they are intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And those are the basic types of motivation. And they are supported by other drivers. So there's biological drivers that really promote and empower people to be to find motivation. So we talk about some of those innate drivers like hunger and thirst and sleep. So those behaviors that really keep us balanced and maintain our homeostasis drives motivation as significantly as anything else, as well as social motivation motives. So we talk about that need for interaction, that need for affiliation, that need for being gregarious and engaging with others, a sense of achievement, a sense of intimacy, a connection with someone on a deeper level drives motivation just as well. So for the record, I think what's important to note here is that motivation is both external and internal and has drivers that sustain them or promote them in that element. Any questions there? Does that ring true to you? Does that make sense? Do you see that in your personal and professional engagement? Fantastic. Love to hear that. We want to make sure we're all kind of on the same page here. So once we have a good understanding as to what motivation is, what it looks like, what drives it, it's critical and important for us to now go into what it looks like in action. So what are the key components of it? What is the structure of motivation? What does it play out like? How does it reflect in the environments in which we are in personally and professionally? Think of if you've ever had a goal, and I'm going to say this one, and you're going to have to stick with me just to stay, right? Because it's probably the most popular, but oftentimes the most debated, right? If you have a goal, classic, you want to lose 20 pounds or running a marathon, you probably already know simply having the desire to accomplish that goal is not enough. Because we can want to do it, we can aspire to do it. It doesn't make it all possible simply because we have a desire to do it, right? You must be able to persist through obstacles and have the endurance to keep it going despite difficulties. Because as we know, trying to lose weight to run a marathon is going to take some challenges and hurdles and stop and starts. So there's a lot more to it than simply having a desire. So as we look at motivation, in terms of its evolution and process, we look at activation. How do we activate what it takes to get us motivated? When we speak to activation, it's about that decision to initiate the behavior. There is some intrinsic or it's extrinsic motivation that we have that drives us towards this goal. Whether it's some social or some tangible stuff, we want to demonstrate our physical prowess, or we want to please someone, or we want to join someone in losing weight, being a better self, being a healthier self, or running a marathon. It starts with activation. And once we get to that point where we're activated, we have a sense of readiness, confidence, and we note that our ability is in place. Then we have to look at how do we persist and persevere through the obvious challenges that are going to come. So when we speak to persistence, we talk about how do we continue our effort even through obstacles. And there's many examples of that. Think of if you were in school and the classes, and I'll say this, and the classes are kicking your butt, right? Your challenge is tough. You have a professor that's grading on a curve or grading tough, but you have a need for this particular education opportunity or the scholarship or the diploma that's going to come for it. You have to find a way of persevering through those tough times. Staying up late at night, studying, joining a study group. There's many ways of demonstrating some level of persistence that enables you to stay on course. Then there's the level of intensity that we have to engage in. The vigor that it takes to pursue the goal. Because as you know, particularly in education pursuit, you have an understanding clearly what you want to accomplish. You continuously keep at it. You also have to know the level of intensity it's going to require for you to optimize your functioning. So you have to put in the necessary effort in the level of intensity and duration it takes to accomplish it. So what's a key element here of motivation is to understand the components, understand that ebb and flow. We have to have a level of activation. We have to be able to persist through obstacles and maintain a level of intensity to accomplish that goal. So as you'll know, we're traversing and taking that path through the conceptualization of motivation, looking at the types of motivation, the drivers of motivation. We look at the key components of motivation. So we're really traveling down that path. Now think of which component, which aspect of motivation, from activation, persistence, or intensity, in your professional experience and engagement with your consumers, which one of those elements shift the most with your clients? When you are trying to facilitate or promote motivation in the consumers that you serve or the clients that you serve, which of these components is the most challenging or you see shift the most with people? Persistence, says Eric. Absolutely. Persistence is a tough one, right? Because many of us, and certainly the people we serve, say, I know, I want that, it's important to me, I want to achieve a housing, I want to have a job, I want to maintain that job. But what it takes to persevere through the challenges and obstacles is tough. Intensity is also a significant one, because sometimes we see people start off with great vigor and great commitment, and that ebbs and flows or wanes over time. So certainly, in many cases, from activation to intensity can wax and wane over time. So we have to be vigilant and also make sure that the people we serve are aware that even if they're committed and have that concept of a goal-directed, purposeful, intentional action, it's going to take some commitment and intensity and perseverance to make it to goal achievement. So that's important to note. So think of what are some of the common causes of low motivation? What do we see that really undermines or impede motivation among the people we serve. Because herein we want to kind of get your sense. I want you to picture it. I want you to kind of stay in the frame. Barriers, barriers, barriers. The now of a situation and not seeing the future. That's an important one. That's a great one. Not feeling they're worth it. Exhaustion from surviving, being in survival mode, a lack of self-trust. You guys are really honing in on those elements. Generally speaking, for the people we serve, particularly with mental health conditions and faced with recovery challenges, when we look at what are some of the causes of low motivation, oftentimes it presents in the form of mental or physical health challenges, right? People are not physically able or mentally able, cognitively able to kind of activate, persist, and sustain the level of intensity. Fear and anxiety. Am I going to be able to do it? Can I sustain? Can I persist? All or nothing thinking. Well, if I did this first two things and it doesn't work, then it's not worth it, right? You get into that black and white thinking. Sometimes it's more tangible. If I do this, if I take this opportunity to move in this direction, I may lose my benefits. I may lose my Medicaid. I don't want to take that risk. So there's some benefit concerns. Social isolation, stigma. Sometimes there are external elements that are really impeding activation and persistence. And I think most of you kind of really hone in a lot of that. Fear of failure. Seeing the reward for the effort as not being tangible or not being meaningful. So it's important to recognize those causes of low motivation in order for you to take some kind of action or to spur or promote or empower people to really recognize those early predictable signs and have a sense that they're normative, and then have a clear understanding as to what are some strategies for overcoming those concerns. And keep it coming. What's important to note is that it's not merely having a concept of motivation or being motivated, but you have to have some optimism, right? And oftentimes optimism fuels that motivation. Optimism and motivation are closely linked. We have to have that sense, that drive, and that sense of a belief in positive outcomes. And I think most of you alluded to it. You have to have a sense of belief that this is possible. And I saw to one of our audience's response, you have to also believe you're deserving. And this is worthwhile. So belief in a positive outcome is just as significant a driver of motivation. You have to have a sense that there are going to be times when increased effort and persistence is required and you're able and you're willing. Certainly, we have that concept of anticipating that positive outcome is oftentimes associated with a release of dopamine, a neurotransmitter linked to pleasure and motivation. So there's a lot of biological, psychological, and emotional drivers that really promote optimism to move actively towards acting in a motivated way. We have to have some level of proactive engagement and persistence across time. So the message here is more than desiring something and having a feeling that you are in the right frame of mind to do it. You have to have a belief in the possible outcome. You have to have a positive sense, an optimism about it. So let's take a moment or two and just give me some feedback, a quick poll. Which area of service do you find it hardest to maintain client motivation in? Supported housing, supported employment, substance use recovery, or other services? Just look across the services that you possibly provide and tell me which service area that you find hardest to help clients maintain motivation. And just what I was expecting. A lot of housing, a lot of substance use, employment. So it seems across most of FCS service, you find challenge with motivation, right? And a lot of it can be associated with less than optimum intrinsic and less than optimum extrinsic motivator, or sometimes the drivers. That sense of optimism, someone that's consistently been challenged and haven't been able to attain their goals, they can lose optimism. Healthcare follow-ups. Tanya, thank you for mentioning that. Because oftentimes, even if there is evidence that a person is not optimally motivated in one area, sometimes it occurs across integrated care. And sometimes it's driven by that person not having the best level of medical care that actually exacerbates or sometimes impacts the other areas of their lives. Thank you for taking the time to provide that feedback, but glad to hear that motivation is challenging across most of the service areas. So we have to look at it cross-sectionally in many regards. So why does it matter? Why does motivation and optimism matter? What makes it important in what you do? What we know is that motivation equals the energy for change. People have to have that energy for change, right? Because your best clinical skills, your best promotional opportunities, your best engagement with folks has to be complemented by motivation, whether internally or externally for that person. So it's where we find the energy for change. We have to dig deep and really connect with that person to find out what inspires them, what gives them that energy for change. Then how do they find optimism? How do you get to the place where they can believe change is possible? And what we find and what we continue to research is, what are these elements linked to? What is motivation and optimism linked to? And what we can see tangibly across service. So what we find is that when people have optimum motivation and optimism, it leads to better housing retention. People oftentimes have improved job placement and tenure, staying longer in a job, finding more fulfillment in the job. Oftentimes what we notice is that there's reduced relapse risk. People are more not just committed to the efforts of recovery, but have that ability to persevere and have that ability to continue to provide the level of intensity and engagement. And overall, what we find is an improved mental health outcomes for people who are able to find intrinsic or extrinsic reasons to stay motivated and optimistic about their engagement in services and the possibility of meeting their goals. So there's a significant reason to have a good understanding and working knowledge of strategies and approaches to facilitating and promoting motivation and optimism in the people you serve, as well as in your colleagues and the team that you serve in. Motivation and optimism is omnipotent in a way. It should really be across both the service provider and the service recipient in order for things to really work optimally. So we have to, as much as we are not consistently engaged in really focusing on motivation and optimism, it has critical importance to what we do. Because it also reminds you that change comes from when a person believes it's important and when they find reason to commit to doing it. So you're able to clearly distinguish that you are here as a coach, as a motivator, but ultimately change and outcomes for an individual is going to be inspired and is going to be revealed from that person's commitment and motivation and optimism to doing it. So as much, sometimes it reminds us of how much how limited we are in really making something happen, it also gives us a lot of inspiration to really empower people to make it happen. So what are the impacts of motivation and optimism across FCS, right? When we look at our clients, motivation and optimism helps increase engagement. It helps clients build resilience, encourages healthier behaviors, and ultimately improves outcome at a client level. At the provider level, staff level, clinician level, professional level, it really facilitates or empowers us to really strengthen therapeutic relationships, foster a positive environment for change action and change behavior. Oftentimes, when we have a level of motivation and optimism at the staff level, we're able to identify and address burnout concerns. Absolutely, Marissa. Never want to take for granted or understate the importance of motivation and optimism for providers of services. Sometimes we forget that we require the same level of optimism our clients do to keep doing what we're doing. So it's good to note how those intrinsic elements and extrinsic elements really impact both sides of the service relationship. And ultimately, it's important to remember and to recognize that motivation counteracts barriers to change. If we're able to fuel and promote motivation, it really addresses a number of the barriers that really potentially can impede all our efforts, both collectively, clients and providers of services. Motivation impacts barriers by changing and directly influencing the individual's willingness and ability to overcome those barriers. High motivation can overcome inertia, fear, and resistance by creating a belief in the benefits of change. It helps reduce fear and uncertainty. People are motivated, people have that level of persistence and that level of sustainability in terms of their efforts. They understand that I believe this is possible in spite of the potential obstacles and barriers and things that I have to overcome. So the fear and uncertainty is put in perspective. It aligns with personal benefits. People have a clear understanding as to, because I value this and it's important to me, it's worth putting that effort and energy into to stay optimistic and stay motivated. It helps increase readiness and belief. If I believe in the possibility of this, if I know that I can persevere, if I know I have what it takes to sustain that level of intense engagement, then I can find the readiness and confidence to do anything possible. And ultimately, motivation and optimism and hope encourages action. If I believe it, then it's possible. If it's possible and I believe it, I can do it. And in order to do it, I take action. One step at a time. I keep my shoulder to the wheel. So the message here is that it's more than simply a belief. It's about action. It's about change. It's about inspiration. It's about staying on track. It's about persevering. But ultimately, no one takes meaningful, intentional action towards a goal without motivation and optimism. Reminder that we can't mandate and dictate motivation and optimism, right? We can't do that. Question here, how one maintains motivation with a client when the steps of the change don't move as fast as a client may want? Good question, Edward. And we'll talk some more about what that looks like. I think to give you a quick kind of response and feedback to that, is that if we lay out a plan of change that has predictable steps and a clear understanding as to the potential obstacles, it's a little easier to then regroup with a consumer or client who may have some concerns about the pace of change and say, listen, When we developed this plan and we understood our pursuit, there was a likelihood that things will not move as quickly as possible. What is concerning you here? What is it about the pace that is either undermining or limiting your motivation? And really address those things. And we'll talk about how it's important to address people's feelings and concerns along the way. But it's a great question. So understanding the barriers to change. If we don't understand the barriers, we can't then have a predictable strategy to overcome them. So when we look at the different service entities, we look at housing. Oftentimes we are providing services to people who are challenged, who may have a significant trauma history. There may be physical elements in terms of the lived environment, from clutter to challenges, and we talk about that in our hoarding consortium and our hoarding concerns, that really may impede someone's ability to maintain the housing in a sustainable way. There may be lease compliance stress, right? All the other things that I have to do managing my mental health and my substance use concerns, the lease is probably the tertiary concern in my head, but it's just as significant in terms of maintaining the goal of living and integrating the community meaningfully and successfully. So it's important for us to have a sense of and have a discourse and an ongoing engagement with our consumers around noted, predictable barriers to change. And also lay out the red carpet for the people we serve to inform us when they encounter barriers that they may not have anticipated, so that we can work together to either problem solve around it or to find ways in which we can keep moving in spite of those barriers. When we speak to employment for the people we serve, we talk about stigma, gaps in work history, fear of failure, lots of other associated concerns with supported employment. Similarly, for substance use recovery, we talk about cravings and ambivalence and relapse cycle and the people, places, and things that may impact or undermine maintaining perseverance and persistence in our recovery. There are greater system barrier at the macro level that may impact motivation. Limited resources, stigma, inconsistent support, whether it's staff shortages, whether it's funding issues, lots of barriers that really present across a wide spectrum that is important to understand, appreciate, and begin some work around problem solving. Jeffrey says we have a huge service area, a methadone clinic which requires participants to physically come to our clinic 6 days per week. And for our first few weeks, a huge barrier for us is simple distance, time, and cost and traveling. Absolutely. Transportation or accessibility can be a major bugbear to people's persistent or consistently engaging in services. And we may have to address that in the early phases or continuously over time, because some of it we know. And to bear truth, some obstacles are oftentimes immovable, right? We cannot oftentimes change macro level, system level obstacles. But certainly over time, you don't have to remake the wheel. There are innovative ways of either getting around those obstacles, getting over those obstacles, or getting through those obstacles, or actually persevering in spite of those obstacles. How do we reduce barriers to change? I think someone was asking that question, right? We start first by building trust. We dedicate significant time to building strong, trusting relationship with the people we serve so that they can feel comfortable opening up with us through their issues in a safe and welcoming environment. Using trauma-informed and strength-based approaches. Really meeting our clients where they're at, really understanding their history, understanding the challenges they come with, and then focusing on the resilience and strength that they bring to the engagement, and driving and promoting those elements of strength. Coordinating care. Sometimes we have to support our consumers in getting the other providers together so we're hearing the same thing. They're operating from a collective understanding of what that person is experiencing as a person, outside of just simply what the service they're responding to. Setting realistic goals. Really looking at how we formulate and create goals that allow people to reach a little beyond their comfort zone, but has an ability to be attained because of the knowledge, skills, resources that are available to them. We have to be part of the advocacy group for our clients, right? We have to actively advocate for our clients at the macro level, at the micro level, at the state level, particularly in today's environment where we have our local politicians. We need to inform them and educate them about the service we provide and the impact it has on the people who we serve, the impact it has on our citizenry across the board. Advocacy, as much as it is not oftentimes seen as a primary role that we provide, is just as critical as the clinical service we provide. And we need to take an active role in helping combat stigma against the people that we serve. Because as we know, stigma is a major barrier to change for the people we serve, and we can do so one person at a time and sometimes as a collective. And when we speak to that, we speak to even stigmatizing behavior that comes from us within our service entity. The stigma is not merely associated only with the general public. Oftentimes, there's internal stigma, professional stigma that can impact a person's ability to stay motivated and committed to change. The power of hope in recovery is critical and important, just as much as finding optimal motivation and inspiration and perseverance and optimism. Hope is a foundation of recovery. It is the belief that a future is possible. And there are many sources of hope. We want to encourage a positive mindset and self-reflection in terms of the people we serve. We want to foster a supportive environment. We want to highlight strengths over deficits. We want to believe in every person's inherent capacity to recover, while we work on setting and achieving manageable goals. The concept and the significance of hope cannot be understated. When we speak to that, we speak to, in addition to optimism and motivation, having hope and that belief is just as critical for sustaining and for maintaining that level of intensity in engagement and in work towards meeting our goals. Think of the ways in which your staff or you can create moments of hope for your clients. And that's what we speak to oftentimes. We think that oftentimes it has to be this grand effort. Sometimes hope simply requires or simply is reflected in moments. So I want you to keep that in mind. Because sometimes, particularly in the face of insurmountable obstacles and barriers and challenge, our clients look to us for hope. I love that, Kayleen. Looking for glimmers, opposite of triggers. Hope is powerful. It is absolutely powerful. Sometimes the most significant change agent is hope. So how do we promote change using evidence-based approaches? Because granted, we understand the value of optimism and motivation and the efforts and the strategies to promote that. We also want to look at what do we do from a clinical professional standpoint that is evidence-based, that has been proven to work in our efforts to get our clients moving directionally, intentionally towards change behavior that enables them to meet their goals. So when we speak to motivational interview and recovery-oriented practice, we're talking about using an empathetic and collaborative approach. Taking a walk in our client's shoes for a moment and really approaching the efforts that they're making in a collaborative way with great support. We want to help our consumers resolve ambivalence about behaviors that prevent change. How do we help them move intentionally towards change behavior in spite of and despite the fact that they have reservations that are meaningful? Think of it. I've tried, a client overture to use. I've tried this recovery thing. I've tried staying away. I've tried sobriety for many times, and I haven't had great success. But I hear you saying that it's possible. Help me understand what that means. Or why should I put the effort in? And your response is, you made it clear that your goal is to repair some of the relationships that was meaningful and mutually rewarding to you, and you know the importance of recovery in attaining that goal. Has that desire changed? No, it hasn't changed, but I have these fears. Well, those fears are fine, but you can overcome them. People have. So it's sometimes staying with that person, particularly when things are bleak. Help people find their own motivation for change. What value-based elements drive your desire for change? What are those intrinsic motivators? Focusing on strengths and aspiration. Building confidence and a sense of purpose. Helping someone connect their goals to a valued life role or a value in their lives that they can use as an anchor to stay grounded and to stay committed. Aligning with hope, autonomy, and personal meaning. Connecting change to values and goals. Right? The concept of me getting healthier is not merely because my doctor says I should, because I know what it feels like and what it means to have a healthier lifestyle, to have more stamina, to have more energy, to be able to do the things I want to do. I connect that goal with the intrinsic value that drives the motivation and optimism for me to get up every day and keep doing what I'm doing in an effort to achieve that goal. So let's look at what motivational interviewing in across many areas will look like, right? In terms of the services we provide, housing, employment, and recovery. We look at some questions that really prompt a discourse or engagement, a sense of what that person's looking at. What would it look like if your apartment felt more like a home? So we're trying to connect the value to that goal. Because if you shift it from simply an apartment to a home, the concept of a home, it has more of a value-based element. When we think of employment, how would you having a job change your daily routine or change your self-image or your self-esteem? In terms of recovery, what do you like about using and what don't you like about using? Really looking at how do we help that person recognize and address their ambivalence. And there's lots of other open-ended questions that really tackle some major areas to help that person decipher for themselves where do they find the motivation and optimism to work towards these particular elements in spite of their fears and uncertainty. So when we speak to building motivation in supported housing, these are some tested strategies that has borne dividends for a number of our engagement with our consumers. It's important that we break tasks into steps, particularly if someone is dealing with an environmental concern. Cleaning one drawer, paying rent on time, addressing the landlord respectfully, noting their appointments on a calendar or in a phone that they can actually access. Celebrate compliance milestones. I have paid my rent consistently for the last 3 months. I have maintained my sobriety. I've actually shown up at work on time for the last week. I've spoken to my supervisor when I have concerns or challenges as opposed to calling out. Strength-based housing goals, really looking at what that person brings as opposed to what deficits-oriented discourse we're having. Talk about, yes, you may not have been able to sustain housing over a long period of time, or you've had an extended period of homelessness, but you bring belief, optimism, and motivation. You bring an understanding of what it is to maintain housing. You bring some basic ADL skills. You bring a good social support network. So in spite of the fact that you've never done this as successfully you like before, there is entirely the commitment, motivation, and optimism to move incrementally towards getting there. Encourage peer support. You may not have done it before successfully, but you know a few folks who've gone to your program or in your community who may have done it and sustain it. Connecting to find out what works for them. You may discover what you already have in terms of knowledge, skills, and resource that you simply have to activate or sustain to make that happen for you. Be able to really establish some good trackers so people have a sense of accomplishment, right? From progress trackers to vision boards, things that inspire people and keep them motivated and lend a sense of optimism to and give them hope, particularly in times of challenge. That's a great question, Carrie. If anyone has a good progress tracker they're willing to share, I'd love for you to share resources. And I think that would be great. Because we don't have the one thing sometimes we don't have to remake the wheel. Sometimes someone is doing it well, someone has a version of it that can be adapted to your environment. It's important to share resources. When we look at building motivation in supported employment, we talk about exploring with folks career aspiration and not just a job, really changing the connotation in terms of how we describe the endeavor. Let's talk about your career aspirations as opposed to, let's talk about you finding a job. Proactively address fear of rejection through role play. What happens if the first time you go to work and you're in your job, someone challenges you in terms of your competence and confidence? How do you address that in a respectful, professional way? What are the protocols for complaints or addressing discrimination or stigma or other elements in a professional setting? Celebrate interviews. Even if the person may not have gotten the job in the first interview, what are some things you did well in the interview? What are some of the positive feedback you get? What are the things you may have learned about what you need to do to be better prepared and equipped for the job for the next interview? You want to align yourself with peer role models who have also done things successfully or who may have encountered similar struggles like you and may have overcome that or may be in the same struggle, and you can share that camaraderie in your efforts to overcome those struggles. An important point, Tanya. Career aspirations versus not just any job can be difficult for those with legal system background, as their career aspiration may be different from not just any job at this stage in their journey. Absolutely, Tanya. Point taken. I think what's important to note here is that even if the person is not in the scope or the engagement that they see as their career aspirations, sometimes whatever you're doing in terms of employment or vocation can still be seen as a step in the right direction. And sometimes it merely says to connect with the consumer, say, listen, we've all been in places where we have worked to pay our bills and do other things in a job that is not our ideal job, but it has given us knowledge, skills, and resource we need to move directionally and intentionally to the job that we want to find ultimately. So sometimes it's where we are in that process of moving intentionally to our optimum goal, even if where we are is not where we need to be or where we think we should be. It's keeping that hope and optimism and inspiration alive in spite of the challenges. But it's a great point. So, how do we build motivation in recovery? The concept of harm reduction alongside abstinence goals is important because sometimes it's important to give people options and not simply have a goal that is recommended but is not feasible for that person, particularly in recovery. And I know sometimes the obstacle may be systemic in that you can't enter this program unless you commit to total abstinence. They may not have be a harm reduction option in this particular program, but you can certainly frame your engagement with that person through a harm reduction lens so that that person don't feel a complete failure if they're not able to stay sober all the time, while looking potentially for a service entity that may accommodate a harm reduction approach. Once again, you may not be exactly where you need to be, but you have to stay on the road to where you want to go. Celebrate days sober and healthy coping skills. Encourage supportive communities. Step, smart, peers, different programs. There's not a one stuff fit all for everyone. People may have different ways of getting to the same goal. Highlight recovery role models. Sometimes people find inspiration and motivation from other people who may have had similar experience like them but have achieved, as opposed to merely looking up for a professional, a provider, a counselor, clinician for inspiration. Sometimes inspiration can be found at the same peer level as opposed to looking towards someone outside of that person's immediate scope. So let's think about some practical strategies for building motivation. It's important and critical to set small, achievable goals so that it allows and accommodates for early wins, early achievements so that people can stay motivated. And sometimes that means throttling down as a provider, or sometimes helping the people we serve really establish goals in short-term, intermediate, and long-term goals so that they themselves are not overreaching. Celebrate progress. Have clear and definitive way of celebrating effort, celebrating benchmarks, so that you're not waiting for the end of the year or the review of the service plan and treatment plan to talk about the gains that people have made. And I love that, Odessa, laying out clear action steps. Yes, if people have a clear and understandable and predictable movement towards their goal, it's easy to recognize where you are in relation to your goal. Use strength-based language. Even in times of struggle, we can be strength-based. John, I know you are a little, overwhelmed by the efforts you have to put in to get to this particular goal, but I admire the commitment you have, the willingness to talk about your struggles, and your desire to come back every day. I'm very proud of you. Encourage peer support. We talk about the importance of peer support. As we know with a number of our clients, sometimes it is hard to resonate and connect with someone who hasn't been there, right? And most of our professional realm, we may not be able to say unless we're, have similar lived experience to say, I know what that means. Sometimes the person wants to hear someone say, I know what it means to walk down the path that you're walking. Absolutely. Continuously inquire about successes, challenges, optimism, what happens. So how do we instill optimism across all the service entities that we provide? We have to model positive outlook. Share recovery stories. Talk about folks who've had stability in their housing, who've had good job placement and long tenure, who've maintained sobriety. And when I say talk about it and share those stories, we're not doing it in a way that may actually lend itself to someone feeling that you're talking above them, or you're being condescending, or you're comparing them to someone else. You certainly can share a story that that person, given your relationship, can understand and be activated. Because ultimately, sharing recovery stories is about activation, right? You have to have a good sense as to when the appropriate story is the best for that person to stay motivated. You don't want to share necessarily a story about a person's finding the courage to commit to a change when that person is already struggling with persistence. Those stories may be best fit for someone who's pre-contemplative or contemplative. So you have to know where that person is in the change continuum and what stories are appropriate for that level of change or that stage of change. Reframe setbacks. Language is a powerful thing. Missed rent, job rejection, relapse, you use it as a learning experience. Listen, John, I know that, you got a warning letter from your landlord about late rent. I'm glad that you shared it with me. It demonstrates your recognition that, you need to stay consistent in doing so. You've talked to me about some of the obstacles, also talk about what you plan to do to maintain consistency and timeliness. Let's take last month's challenge as an opportunity to learn and grow to stay focused. Inspire folks to talk about future endeavors, right? The future stories. John, if you were where you are, how would you describe when you achieve your goal? What would be your frame of reference? How would you describe when you feel that you are progressing towards your goal? How would you describe it to a loved one or someone that you're connected to? If you are in a peer model role, what would you say to a peer in terms of your struggles and overcoming, your successes and challenges? And that's how oftentimes we can inspire people to take on that modeling, that role modeling frame, as well as engage potentially in serving as a peer role model. So we want to look across at how we utilize motivational interviewing strategy and optimism strategy for specific challenges, right? When we look at the housing concern, a good example is the client refuses to clean despite eviction risk. What kind of motivational strategy can we use in that instance? And here we have illicit and decisional balance, right? We look at the pros and cons of cleaning versus not cleaning. We provide information about eviction risk, and then we elicit the client reaction. John, it is very clear that you have to have egress and exits clear in order to maintain your residence. You're at risk of eviction if that doesn't happen. What are some of the challenges and potential obstacles you face from getting that done? And what kind of support you need? What kind of action would it take? What resources would you need? What skills do you have that you can apply to that to make that happen? Really engage in that, tackling that ambivalence with the person. Some optimism strategy, we can highlight past successes. Strength-based reframing. John, in the past, you've had the same problem before, and we took 2 weeks and we worked earnestly and incrementally towards clearing out those pots. You've done it before. I'm sure you can do it again. You may need more supports because you may be physically compromised or whatever, but we can. There are opportunities and resources to support you. Focus on the times that the client maintain housing. Reinforce a sense of control and ability to act. You can actually take definitive action. You have the power to do this. Whether you stay in this home or succumb to eviction is up to you. It is within your power. You can ask for help. You can take definitive action. You can do this. Similarly, in terms of an employment situation, the client says, I'm unemployable, which may happen at sometimes. Right? Client says, I have no history of work, or I've messed up every effort that I've had to gain work. You look at reframing and affirmations. Acknowledge that in spite of having had that history, the person still has a desire and they're connected to a value within them. So work is still a significant value-based element to them. Be careful and refrain from using negative labels when engaging in those discourse about challenges. An optimism strategy could be instilling hope through strength identification. Explore past work or volunteering successes, right? Use scaling questions to build motivation. Hey, John, in spite of the fact that you haven't had success with 2 work opportunities, you still talk about work every time we're engaged. I see you helping out your neighbor often, right? Give directions. You go over there, you help. These are some skills. Connection. The ability to engage with other people, the ability to have a consistent habit of doing the right things consistently. They are strengths that you can apply to work. We just have to work on how do you identify specific strategies to better prepare you in terms of confidence and competence for work. So there's ways of reframing even the challenges and obstacles to really promote optimism and motivation. So this is a good chart in terms of specific challenges and how do we apply MI and optimism strategy. It'll be available to you. So what is staff role in promoting change? We talk about all the clinical approaches we can take in terms of, supporting and assisting, coordinating efforts. We want to maintain consistency and reliability. There is nothing like someone knowing you're there when you say you're going to be there, and you're reliable in terms of doing what you say you're going to do to support them and assist them. Build trust by both maintaining consistency and reliability, as well as really helping that person work through their processes. Encourage autonomy. Give that person back a sense of their strengths and abilities and power. Ultimately, you want to balance accountability with compassion. You want to demonstrate an earnest care for that person empathy, but at the same time, you can hold them accountable. John, I know how significant this goal is for you. I know how hard you've worked. I know all the obstacles you've come across, but you can do some more because it requires maintaining a level of perseverance. And I'm here to support you. Whether you achieve it or don't, I'm here. So staff roles across services can be different, building trust, reinforcing lead stability, for modeling optimism on the job, normalizing relapse with folks in recovery, instilling hope, highlighting strengths, and remaining consistent across the board. So there's lots of approaches that staff can take to actually help maintain motivation. But never forget, in all our efforts to promote and sustain and facilitate hope, optimism, and motivation, we have to take care of ourselves. Because we're not good to anyone if we're not taking care of ourselves. I know most of you may be familiar with the analogy of you can't pour from an empty cup. Burnout and secondary trauma could impact our ability to provide those empowerment and support and assistance. So we need to take care of ourselves. We need to model those behaviors for the people we serve. Prioritize rest and relaxation. Cultivate a good support system. I see that oftentimes, and I think it's unconscious hypocrisy we attempt to demonstrate. We tell our clients oftentimes they need to expand and fortify their natural supports. And sometimes we don't do that for ourselves. Please remember, there is no room or scope for martyrdom in the service we provide. So we have to take good care of ourselves and do that in an intentional, meaningful way. We need to set boundaries. Sometimes know fully well that we can't be all things to all people. And know when to say no. Be mindful of burnout and compassion fatigue. Know the signs. Know the strategies towards addressing those things. Talk to our peers and colleagues and our supervisors about what we are experiencing. Engage in reflective supervision so we can talk about the impact of our service and ourselves. Acknowledge your strengths. Utilize all the resources available to you, from EAP to peer support to other things. As a staff, as a professional, we need to maximize that. We need to model good support. So as we bring this to a close, I certainly want to ask you, what kind of action planning will you do as it relates to inspiring and promoting motivation and demonstrating optimism and motivation and hope for yourself as you serve your clients? Think of one strategy you will apply this week to promote optimism and motivation for your clients in housing, employment, and recovery. What is one thing that you will try with clients this week? Take a moment and think about it and share it with us in the comments. What one strategy you will apply this week to inspire and promote motivation? Hunter says, I will dig up all my motivational interviewing techniques and I will apply it. Celebrate small wins. Absolutely. Practice reframing challenges as learning opportunities. Remind your clients of prior success. I love that, Bree. The glimmers, find the glimmers in the barriers. Selena says, really create a chart of progress and achievement. Yes. Don't forget to celebrate those small wins. So there's lots of resources, and I appreciate you sharing that. There's a tremendous amount of resources, from recovery-oriented practice toolkit to motivational interviewing techniques, wellness and wrap plans. There's lots of resources for both yourself and the ones that your clients can use autonomously. Just want to make sure that that's available to you. And there's lots of handouts and resources as well. Want to take a quick moment and see if there's any questions. And while you think of questions, I want to remind you that the key takeaway from today should be really looking at instilling and inspiring hope, motivation, and relationship, and those small steps, those small intentional movement towards change. Any questions? Please take a moment while you're at it. I know Emily added to the chat to provide us some feedback using our evaluation on how you experience this particular webinar and all the other webinars. We always look for your feedback to strive to maintain an active, fluid kind of changing and evolution of the webinar so they better meet your needs, but we want to make sure that you get as much as you can. So you certainly can use this to get to provide us some feedback. And we look forward to hearing from you in terms of how the webinar was, what were your experience like, and while you're doing so, the reference available to you. But ultimately, I want to thank you. We appreciate your time and attention and participation. Today's webinar was hosted by DBHR through the Washington Healthcare Authority. Don't forget to check out all things FCS and the newsletter. And there's some information certainly for WellPoint as we provide. But as usual, it's always a pleasure. And yes, Kelly, this PDF slides and the recording of the webinar will be available to you. So keep an eye out for that. But thank you all once again. It's, as usual, a splendid opportunity to engage with you. I hope that this was informational and supportive of what the work you do. And I implore upon you to continue to do the great work you do and know that you're valued. And what you do is important. It may change the life of the people you serve, and it may simply be the one thing that can give a person hope to continue in their efforts. Very good. I'm glad that it served its purpose and it was inspiring, but look forward to our next opportunity to engage with you. In the meantime, take good care of yourself and each other, and look forward to seeing you sometime soon for another in our series of webinars.